So we are live now, just so you know. Elsa, can you say something?
Yes, I can hear.
I can't. Okay, listeners, please bear with us. We'll figure out something. But Elsa, can you say something now? Okay. But I guess both of you can hear me, right? Kjetil and Elsa. That's very strange. I can hear neither of you. So I will try. All right, I will try. Oh, okay. Oh, it was my mistake.
Oh, you didn't add him.
No, I didn't add you to the stream. It was my mistake. Huge apologies. I'm sorry.
Okay.
You can hear me now.
I can hear you perfectly now. So
perfectly,
yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
So I will. Hey, hello, Kjetil. Welcome to Mereba Esset.
Hi, Aspeto.
Yeah, please do introduce our guest, our viewers, Elsa, while you are at it.
But my camera is off. I think it's better.
It's fine. We can hear you clearly.
Okay. So we usually do Tigrinya programs, but sometimes we have English-speaking guests. And today we have Professor Kjetil Tronvoll, and we are very, very pleased to have you here. And thank you for coming. And Teklay, good luck. I wish it was a pleasant discussion, and I'm sure it will be a very wonderful conversation. So, looking forward to listening.
Thank you, Elsa. I'm sorry for the inconvenience. Thanks for tuning in and helping us.
Yes.
You can leave now. You have the permission.
Yeah.
All right. So like Elsa said, our guest today is Professor Kjetil Tronvoll. He's a professor at the University of Bern's University College in Oslo. He's a professor of peace and conflict and related areas. He has a PhD in political anthropology from the University, I think, London School of Economics, if I'm right. And he has written on many issues related with Africa, and especially East Africa, the whole of Africa, on human rights, on transitional justice, on peace and reconciliation, which are very, very important for us today, on democratization and elections, on political anthropology, which is his main area, and on general African studies. So we have an expert who has a huge wealth of expertise on Africa. And he's now the director of Oslo Analytica as well. And I'm really, really looking forward to this discussion, Kjetil, and I appreciate you joining for this discussion. So please say a few words about it.
Thank you so much for inviting me, Teklay. It's my pleasure to be with you.
Thanks. So we will, broadly speaking, we will speak about the war in Tigray. We will be restricted to that. And I was wondering if we could kind of divide our topic into two broad categories. We will talk about what has happened up until now. And we will also briefly talk about what we think should be done and should happen going forward to find a peaceful resolution. So in terms of what happened, I thought I would start from your last visit to Ethiopia, which I think would have been at about a year ago now, sometime in September, October, around the time when there was the Tigray election. And I would put it to you, Kjetil, if during your observation, you must have some conversations with a lot of people in Mekelle and in Addis Ababa. Did you see anything resembling to what has since come to pass, to what has since happened, coming then? Did you see the writing on the wall for you?
Yes, indeed, I must say. I have earlier said that this has been the best announced war to come in Africa, and certainly so in September last year. The impressions were among the general public in Tigray that they were heading towards a war, and certainly also among the political leadership and other observers. The intensification of communication to a certain degree. For instance, I had long talks with General Tadkan in Mekelle in September, where we discussed his initiative and the group he has been part of, as is it now known, in trying to mediate, in trying to create dialogue between Addis and Mekelle, between the political leaderships. I've met with the late CEO Mesvin, had long talks with him to listen to his initiatives and the peace plan, so to say, which were drafted in September last year and then submitted to Addis Ababa. But at the same time, even though there were an intense attempts to try to mitigate, to try to avoid the open war, I think the majority believed that a conflict would take place, a confrontation would happen. But that is one thing. But the atrocity war, which were committed later by the Eritrean, Ethiopian, Amhara forces on the Tigrayan people, that was never expected or believed, so to say, that it would take such a violent, such an indiscriminate killing also of civilians and destructions of civilian infrastructure. That's a different matter.
Yeah. So in one of the articles that you have co-authored, I think with Lenner Ford, if I'm not mispronouncing his name, you are very damning about the Ethiopian intellectual class in terms of failing to provide direction, be it in election processes, in other processes that needed to happen soon after Abiy came to power. And I think it would be fair to say that the war was made inevitable by the failure of the intellectual class to have discussions and to steer the country towards a peaceful process. And when there was a conflict between the TPLF and the Prosperity Party, it didn't seem that there was a recourse, a peaceful recourse for negotiation. And I think you seem to be putting the blame squarely on the intellectual class. What do you say about that? What needed to happen to obviate, to make sure that war wasn't an inevitable thing?
Well, we wrote that article long time before the war broke out, and our criticism at that time were directed against the intellectual class in the failure to broaden and deepen and anchor the transition into an inclusive political space in Ethiopia. Because we saw, the events in 2018, everybody embraced that, the openings after April 2018 until December 2018. There was a positive trajectory, although we were early on, some observers among us were a bit hesitant to the fact that the sudden openings, the sudden reforms were not properly institutionalized, were not properly anchored into proper institutional procedures and mechanisms. But it could be excused as it was in a way of a honeymoon period. But from late 2018, early 2019, we saw that the reforms were backsliding, both the domestic reforms in Ethiopia, but also the so-called peace process with Eritrea, with the closure of the border in late December. So that is the basis kind of the criticism in that article and a couple of other articles I wrote at that time, in the sense that now, in the meaning of 2019, early 2019, late 2018, is the time for all civil society in Ethiopia, for the intellectual elite, for the political elite to really work in unison in order to broaden and deepen these political reforms, which we saw backsliding. I don't give them blame for the war. The war, it is the warring parties to blame for that, so to say, those who are commanding the army. So it's somehow connected, but not directly related. Yeah.
Yeah, indeed. I raised that point because in the ultimate analysis, we will have to talk about why is it that war was thought as a viable recourse in this day and age. And I think if you dig down to the bottom of things, I would completely agree with the assessment that you have written in that article, in that the Ethiopian elite has failed to provide alternative ways of resolving conflict. So it might seem completely irrelevant in the face of what is being done now, but ultimately it would matter. And it was a very interesting read. But in terms of the parties who are directly to blame for starting the war, there are two. Let's say the Prosperity Party blames the TPLF for starting the war, and the TPLF blames the Prosperity Party for starting the war. Now, given that you were in Matala when the tensions were running high between the two political parties, and given that you have just told me you kind of saw it coming, who do you blame it on for the most part?
Well, it's not my job to put blame on anyone, so to say. The main, as I usually say, the war started in December 2019 when after Abiy Ahmed returned from Oslo after receiving the Nobel Peace Prize, he dissolved the EPRDF and established the Prosperity Party. That's the time the war started, you can say. And it is up to historians, more or less, to dig deeper into that process. What is known is that TPLF protested at that time and called the dissolution of EPRDF and establishment of Prosperity Party. They called it a breach of the bylaws and the constitution of the EPRDF party. It was a breach of their procedures. They also claim it was a breach of the election law of Ethiopia, and ultimately a breach of the Ethiopian constitutional framework, the dissolution of a government party, and to replace it with a different party without going to an election, for instance. And that's when TPLF pulled out of the government affairs at the federal level and went back to Mekele for good. So I think a lot is to blame on that procedure, that process, the way it was handled. And the ultimate instigator of that process was Abiy Ahmed himself, who wanted to dissolve the EPRDF to create a new unitary party structure. I am not in a position to say that it was a breach of the election law or of the constitution. I just take notice of the reactions of TPLF, who claim that. And after that establishment of Prosperity Party, you saw the relationship between the federal level and the regional level in Tigray was degenerating day by day, so to say, week by week, with several triggering factors leading up to the outbreak of the war. But we also know that during this period, and even before that period, both sides were preparing, at least in mind, about a potential military confrontation later on. We know from statements from the former deceased Amhara police commissioner, for instance, who went on record in public saying that we were preparing for months in advance for the attack on Tigray before it happened. We have also heard similar statements from ENDF officers in that regard, and also from political sources which are not open to speak in public today, have told me this, obviously, political sources in PP or in the administration, that it was a very well prepared attack. And obviously it need to be prepared since the ENDF, the Amhara forces and the Eritrean forces hit more or less at the same time against the Tigrayan forces. So obviously it was a coordinated, well planned, well maneuvered, well executed offensive when that started on the 4th of November.
Yeah. And I think one party that you haven't mentioned is the role of the Eritrean government. And I think one of the things that hasn't been absolutely clear to everybody is the manner with which Eritrea entered Tigray. We know that it entered, but was it invited? How much was Isaias part of the planning? Did have the Eritrean troops enter Tigray on their own volition against the wish of the Ethiopian government? These variables seem to be kind of unknown, at least officially speaking. And since you have been studying the Horn of Africa in general, and I'm sure you have studied the different actors, the different parties that have been involved in the war, do you have anything that you want to say as to how the different parties coordinated together and the timing and everything? If you will have something to add on that, otherwise we can go to the next topic.
Well, I can briefly say that, you know, I'm not privy to the internal confidential reports or communication between Asmara and Addis during that period. I just take note of the very frequent visits, high-level visits, Abiy Ahmed and his top guys going to Asmara, Isaias Afwerki and his team going to Addis and traveling Ethiopia frequently before the outbreak of the war. The fact that it was a coordinated attack, that Eritrean mechanized brigades and artillery started to shell Humera, for instance, simultaneously as the attack on the southern and western fronts happened, that Eritrean forces were prepared and deployed on the Sorona and Salambesa front lines and entered into Tigray the second, third day after the offensive started in the south. It's not rocket science to connect the dots that this was a coordinated and planned attack, and that Isaias Afwerki were invited by Addis Ababa to take part in the offensive against Tigray. After several months, as you know, Ethiopian authorities were forced to acknowledge the presence of Eritrean troops. And when they initially acknowledged that, their comment were, these are not enemy forces. They were invited because it is not an internationalized war. Ethiopian government are still insisting on the fact that this is not an internationalized war, meaning then Eritrean forces is on Tigrayan Ethiopian soil upon invitation by the federal government. That's the definition of a non-internationalized war when you have a foreign enemy or a foreign force on your soil. It means that they are invited by the government of the land. So it is quite clear that Eritrean troops were invited by Abiy Ahmed and the federal government to fight against their own people. Yeah.
Yeah, you just reminded me of the in the Amnesty International report that was released last week, accounting the atrocious rape crimes that had been committed against Tigrayan women. They say, they don't say that it's international war. They say that there are some variables missing for them to conclude that. And yeah, it seems to coincide with what you are alluding to here. But after the war started, and I'm sure that you have studied many wars, you have studied the thinking, the thought process of many of leaders in war. There has been a relentless and incessant effort by the international community to make Abiy Ahmed sit down for negotiations with the TPLF, and he has been absolutely determined in saying no. Do you understand why? Is it that he is determined to carry on saying no? Have you tried to understand his thought process? Maybe what is he trying to achieve?
Well, he's trying to achieve a military victory over the TDF. If he managed to do that, is a totally different matter. It is interesting, obviously, to observe that from day one, TDF have expressed an interest to talk, initially without any preconditions, later on with preconditions, but still clear articulated interest that negotiations need to be done. And that's also, as far as I understand, the objective of the current TDF offensive is to pressure the federal government to the negotiation table. That is at least their stated objective, public objective. Abiy Ahmed from day one have rejected all calls for negotiations. Immediately after the outbreak of the war, Addis was flooded with international envoys, so to say, both from AU, from bilateral partners, from EU, from US, from UN, you name it, wanted to negotiate, wanted to facilitate negotiations between the belligerent parties. But everyone were rejected by Abiy Ahmed, saying that this is none of your business, this is an internal affair, go home. And that has been his viewpoint until today. And we know that the US Special Envoy Feldman is visiting Ethiopia as we speak. It is not known yet if he has been able to meet Abiy Ahmed in person or if he has to. He had just met the foreign minister. Yeah, Demeke,
from
Yeah, Demeke is meeting, but Demeke is meeting everyone. So he is tasked to handle so-called the internationals. What is Abiy Ahmed's thinking behind this? It's a good question. I think it deserves much closer scrutiny, much closer research on trying to unpack his rationality behind both the war itself, how it is conducted, the rhetoric he's using, and the increasingly inflammatory language he's using, both against parts of his own population, but also certainly against Western powers and an international audience. Is more increasingly framed as hostile to Ethiopia. Partner countries to Ethiopia for decades are now turned into enemies of Ethiopia. And the rationality behind slashing his foreign ministry and his diplomatic service is quite baffling in a time of war. Is it anything you should do is to increase your foreign service in order to communicate your viewpoint as your stand against international society. Abiy Ahmed is doing the opposite. And that in combination with the hostile rhetoric towards an international audience, towards a Western international audience in particular, kind of is food for thought, because we have seen this before. And where have we seen it? In Eritrea. This is Isaias Afwerki's strategy, which he have been using for 20-25 years. So possibly Isaias is advising Abiy to do the same, maybe. He thinks that has been successful, but it has destroyed the Eritrean economy. It has destroyed the Eritrean people who have been forced into exile. We see that the current war is, and the current political situation in Ethiopia is also destroying the Ethiopian economy. It is in free fall, and investors are shying away, and lenders are cashing in on their loan or calling it defaults, and the inflation is skyrocketing in Ethiopia. So it is hard from an pure analytical viewpoint to say or to identify the rationality in Abiy's thinking. But I believe, from his point of view, obviously he acts rational, but it's a different kind of thinking, a different kind of framework than conflict analysts and diplomats use. And so we need to put ourselves in Abiy's shoes, so to say, in order to understand that. And part of the explanation here, I think, which is quite fascinating for me as an anthropologist and conflict researcher, is his religiosity, is his religious beliefs, and how that influences his political decisions and his military strategies.
Yeah.
And I think he, and that's a bit scary to say it, at least, that his deep religious devotion is forming his political opinion and influencing his military strategy.
Yeah, well, interesting that you mentioned his religiosity, because there was a leaked audio last week. I don't know if somebody has translated for you, where he was speaking with this prophetess, where she was telling him that God had told her to relay the message that he should carry on doing what he's doing, and that God is for the most part happy with his achievements so far, and that he doesn't want him to negotiate with what she called serpents, which referred, of course, to the TPLF and the other people. So that is also another aspect that people should look into. Maybe if he seriously believes that he is under some divine dictates, then maybe it makes sense to double down in whatever he has been doing. But I think, speaking of thought process, the other party that we should investigate is Isaias Afwerki. And I know that you have written a piece where you openly wondered if this would be the last war that Eritrea would fight, and you also wonder if Isaias is thinking to integrate Eritrea to Ethiopia. And I was just wondering if you have seen any signs that could be in the works, that could be something that they are trying to do behind the scene, and if you have seen any signs, if you think it would be a successful endeavor, given that there are strong nationalists on the Eritrean camp, at least, maybe if not on the Ethiopian side.
Yeah, I wrote that piece in the sense of trying to analyze Eritreans' direct involvement and the stakes in the war in Tigray. And when I say Eritrean, I mean Isaias and his very small ruling clique, because the Eritrean people has nothing to say, obviously, in the war or how the war is fought. They are living under an extreme totalitarian, authoritarian structure, and are just forced to obey whatever comes from the palace in Asmara. So I think this war will eventually lead to Isaias Afwerki's downfall. Yes, I think he has bitten off too much to chew, and both the incurred losses on his own army is quite high. The cost of the war, even though we know that Ethiopia is compensating monetarily to Eritrea for fighting the war, helping Addis, but still the costs are, I believe, also felt in Asmara. And and the fact that it has again inspired Eritrean civil society, Eritrean diaspora, Eritrean opposition to come together, or at least try to come together in new forms and ways with an objective to change government back at home. And of course, to change government in Asmara rests only on the Eritrean people to do that, both the people within Eritrea and certainly also the Eritreans in diaspora. And I think this war has again given that a push to say that, you know, we really need to come together. We really need to try to coordinate our forces, which the Eritrean opposition have been struggling to do for 20-25 years. We see some positive processes ongoing now that it might materialize into a more coherent bloc, so to say, who can challenge Isaias in Asmara. So I think that the ramifications of this eventually will hit back on Isaias, yes. But we are not there yet. And we know that the Eritrean forces are deploying again in Western Tigray as we speak. We're not quite sure about what kind of agreement there are between Addis and Asmara on this issue. But probably the lack of capacity of ENDF forces, they have been decimated, means that in order to defend Western Tigray from a TDF offensive to reclaim it, they would need Eritrean help. But it might also be related to the Al-Fashqa border dispute with Sudan, that Addis would need Eritrean reinforcement, so to say. Your second issue about the possible coming together again of Eritrea and Ethiopia into some kind of new bilateral framework, a confederal framework or something along that. I think that were part of the intentions before the war. And if the war had been successful, as seen from Asmara and Addis, that would potentially be the outcome. But since the offensive on Tigray was unsuccessful, at least so far, that has also put a block, so to say, a spanner in that wheel of a potential new political configuration between Eritrea and Ethiopia. And I think actually it might work against it, in the sense that we already now see some tendencies from the Ethiopian officials to put the blame on Eritrea for the atrocities being committed in Tigray, and potentially kind of positioning themselves for an international juridical criminal investigation. I would believe that Ethiopia and Addis Ababa would put as much blame as possible on Eritrean forces and the leadership in Asmara for the crimes committed in Tigray and against the Tigrayan people, which kind of drives them further apart instead of joining them together. So, and we saw also the way the Eritrean troops, upon orders from Asmara, obviously, did not come to the rescue of ENDF troops during the final offensives of TDF to reclaim central Tigray, for instance. So already early on, and that's what I wrote in that article, we saw that militarily and politically, the forces on the ground, Eritrean forces and Ethiopian forces, was kind of having different objectives, different agendas. Which also reflects the political agendas of the capitals. So I think I think the Eritrean nationals can be not that nervous any longer, because the war turned against Eritrea and Ethiopia. So that objective which were there will not be fulfilled, I believe.
Yeah, interesting. If we can turn attention away from Eritrea for a moment and return to the TDF, I think you have tweeted at some point that the TDF had mounted one of the most successful insurgencies in the world, and that it deserves to be studied. And I don't think there is anybody who would take exception to that assessment. They have indeed sent shockwaves in the world by defeating a combined army of Ethiopia, a heavily mechanized army and the Eritrean army, and they have I think they have done the impossible. But do you believe that since they controlled Mekelle, they have been capitalizing on their success? Do you think they have been doing the right things since, for instance, in terms of advancing to Afar region, in terms of advancing to Amhara region, in terms of trying to give a very strong ultimatum to the government, in terms of going and forging alliances with other forces, for instance, with the Oromo Liberation Army? I'm sure you will have heard that they have forged some sort of at least memorandum of understanding, if not official agreement. What do you make of those moves that the TDF has since made after it had controlled Mekelle?
Yeah, I will not, again, I will not pass a final judgment on that now, because that's too early to say. I can see the way they are thinking, and from one perspective, that obviously makes sense. And in the sense that the offensive beyond the Tigrayan territories in Afar and Amhara is not aimed to conquer new land, so to say. It is aimed possibly a twofold objective, or as they say, threefold objective. They are in hot pursuit, as they claim, of ENDF and regional special forces, with the objective to destroy the capacity of the enemy to inflict harm upon them. Hence, they need to chase them to take out the heavy mechanized artillery and so on, and also the forces, so they cannot be turned against Tigray again. The second objective is potentially to create what is called a strategic depth surrounding Tigray, that because it is a question of time, when the counteroffensive from the Ethiopian forces will take place, that offensive would be fought not on Tigrayan soil, but on Amhara and Afar soil, so to say. So it doesn't destroy again Tigrayan societies and localities. And thirdly, objective to pressure politically Addis Ababa, and to create humanitarian access, so to say, to create potentially routes to bring in the very much needed humanitarian aid to Tigray. So all those objectives from a military, strategic, political viewpoint, you can say make sense. I'm not passing a judgment if it is correct or not. I'm not here as a normative commentator. That I leave to the Ethiopian people to decide, so to say, or to others. But it is, from another perspective, it is, at least some find it a bit puzzling why they prioritize an offensive in Afar and also south, instead of going west to reclaim the western zone of Tigray, and then also by that creating a corridor to Sudan, where you can bring in humanitarian aid and supplies to the famine-struck population. It might be a militarily logical explanation to that it is difficult to cross Tekesse when the bridges are destroyed, and you need to go south and then turn west again and then go north to go into Tigray and Wolkite and Setit Humera that way. So that can explain some of the offensives in Amhara, but it doesn't necessarily explain the Afar and the southern expansion, so to say. But it's an evolving situation as we speak, obviously. It's day-to-day developments. I just had Getachew Reda on the phone just before I was speaking to you now, and he claims, or TDF claims, that the offensives still are successful, that they are just outside Debre Tabor now, and looking into the town, so to say, on the western side there. And it's again, I'm not taking that for granted, obviously. It needs to be verified by other sources also. But it seems to be that at least on the southern and the western lines, the TDF offensives are going quite well. In Afar, there are more mixed data on it, so to say. So I will not necessarily draw the conclusions there.
Yeah, well, I think one of the sticky points with regard to the way the TPLF has advanced into other areas has been what you just mentioned. Some people, definitely the U.S. government, for instance, said that they should withdraw, and that the Amhara forces should withdraw in Western Tigray. I think they framed it as a tit-for-tat action on the part of the TDF, although the TDF's argument is what you just said, that is the only option they have to force Abiy to lift the siege and to force him into the negotiations that they want to happen. So there seems to be among the international community a lack of understanding in context as to why it is that the TDF is making those advances. So I just want to give you opinion. And
and that, you know, from that point of view, because the international community and TDF and the Tigray government have begged or asked Abiy for 8 months, 7 months to pull out of Tigray and to give humanitarian access, which have not been granted. The propaganda and falsehoods communicated by Addis Ababa that full humanitarian access has been granted a long time ago is just blatant lies. Everybody knows it. And as Debretsion has said, is that we cannot sit and wait when the international community has been asking for 8 months for the forces to pull out and to get humanitarian access. We cannot sit and wait for that to happen because our people are starving to death. So we need to take the initiative to create that enabling environment where humanitarian access can be provided to our famine-struck people. So again, yeah, that's a logical extension, so to say, to the offensive. Yeah, to create that pressure on the federal government to accept negotiations and humanitarian access, or to create it by force.
Yeah. Well, I think we're fast running out of time. So I will ask you one question on reconciliation, and then I will jump to the other very important question on the Nobel Peace Prize. I really, really want to talk with you today. On reconciliation, the way the TF seems to see it is to create an alliance with as many forces as possible that are operating in Ethiopia, and to create a transitional government and to take it from there. That seems to be the understanding of the TDF. As an expert in this area, and given that you know what has happened in Ethiopia now, the social fabric has been completely broken between Tigrayans and the Amharas, between the Tigrayans and the Isaias supporters, and between different communities, and it's going to require a huge amount of work to mend this broken social fabric. And I think that falls within the realm of reconciliation. What is it that you think should be done, both at the political level and at other venues?
I agree. I think I have always argued and explained about the amazing capacity of the Ethiopian communities, the Ethiopian ethnic groups, so to say, to reconcile after conflict. We have seen that throughout history, how people at the grassroots rather quickly has reconciled after war campaigns, and has made and has had an ingrained understanding to separate the political elite, those who create and instigate the war, and the farmers, the ordinary people who fight it. And from the local viewpoint, from the ordinary people's viewpoint, the blame has always been put upwards for the wars, not horizontal towards your direct adversary. And by doing so, putting the blame upwards, they can rather quickly reconcile at the grassroots. And we saw that after the Derg War, very, very rapid reconciliation between Eritrean communities and so on. And also after other conflicts internally in Ethiopia. But the current war, as seen from Tigray, has not been a normal war in the sense of the historical experiences with warfare. This war and the way it has been conducted, the extreme atrocities committed against the civilian population, the massive systematic rape of the girls and women of Tigray, the massacres of civilian boys and men and women, the destructions of properties, civilian properties, infrastructure, religious sites, and so on and so forth, has put a very different imprint on it. And I think, historically speaking, to draw a historical parallel, I think, this war campaign in Tigray might be compared possibly with the Menelik expansion conquest campaigns to south and western Ethiopia, where you had extreme atrocities and genocidal warfare against local people resisting, against the Walaita, against the Sidama, against the various kingdoms of the south, to conquer those people. And so I think, I'm afraid of that it will be hard to reconcile again the Tigrayan people with West Ethiopia, in a sense of reconciliation at a deeper level, where the collective group of Tigrayans will again feel safe, secure, at home within an Ethiopian public space. Not only because of the warfare in Tigray, but also because what's happening today with the ethnic profiling throughout the last 8-9 months, and continuing as we speak, intensifying as we speak, because of Abiy Ahmed's inflammatory rhetoric that you have to root out the weed, you have to kill the devils, you have to cut out the cancer, and so on and so forth. Which he excuses himself to say that I mean TPLF. But in the eyes of Ethiopians in general, or at least many of them, the political structure, it means Tigrayans at large. And we know they are harassed, intimidated, arrested, persecuted, detained across Ethiopia today, which also obviously put a scare into all Tigrayans. And I mean also Tigrayans who have been extremely critical to TPLF throughout their lives are now categorized as TPLFites, so to say. So at this point, I think it is difficult to see that rather quick reconciliation processes we have seen earlier. And I think, to be frank, I don't think it will be possible. At least not the generations who are adults today, I think will have a very hard time to feel at home, to feel safe, secure, comfortable within the Ethiopian realm after this war is over. And I'm very sorry to say that.
No, I think, well, you have to say what you feel, and that's what I expect you to do here So no need to feel sorry, Kjetil. But I think there is something that is uniquely Ethiopian, at least in my assessment, and it is to make an enemy of some entity that you don't like for whatever reason. Like, for instance, the TPLF. I think there's no denying that a lot of people in Addis Ababa and around those areas have been brainwashed into thinking that the TPLF is this monster that should be hated. And although that wasn't enough, then there is also this typical Ethiopian psyche to think that unless that enemy is completely uprooted, completely annihilated, then nothing else could be done. And people are literally now waiting. Everything else has been put on the back burner in Ethiopia. Nobody cares about the economy. Nobody cares about education. Everybody now, the political elite is invested in making sure that the TPLF is completely destroyed. And I don't think that could happen, not least because the TPLF is hugely popular in Tigray, especially given what has happened over the last 9 months. And how do you, and it seems to me it's a kind of a conundrum now to resolve this issue. On the one hand, the TPLF is very popular, very accepted in Tigray. On the other hand, you have the political elite in Addis Ababa who are completely committed to making sure that the TPLF is destroyed, and everything else has been made to wait. And how do you think we will extricate ourselves out of this conundrum? If I don't know if I framed my question well.
Yeah, well, yes, I think it is. I agree with you. It seems to be that the political elite in Addis is kind of driving everyone over the cliff top, so to say, by instrumentalizing the war against TPLF to be all-encompassing all government business and affairs to a certain degree. And I'm particularly here pointing towards the economic free fall of the Ethiopian economy as we speak, which really hurts all Ethiopians. All the Ethiopians are suffering because of this war and because of the policies of Prosperity Party. The staple food, the teff, the oil, the everything you need to survive at the wholesale level has doubled in price, more or less, over the since the war started. Jobs are lost and opportunities are lost because of this. And that's quite, baffling that you can prioritize so much focus on eradicating your enemy that at the same time you are eradicating yourself, so to say. You are on a suicidal mission on your whole country, more or less. And that again points to, that we need to understand that political logic in a different manner. And that's what I'm trying to inform Western diplomats, which usually come to an African conflict, and the first thing they say, no matter which country they are in, is that you cannot afford this war. As thinking that the economic aspect of warring is top priority for anyone, like in a European government. The cost of war will be measured so high, in a sense, politically weighted, that we need to find other solution to this conflict because we will lose too much economically by entering into war. So that's the kind of the glasses Western diplomats usually bring with them when they go to an African conflict and tell the people, you cannot afford this war. That's the least of the priorities as viewed from Ethiopia and Addis Ababa. The economy is nowhere near the top list of priorities because they have different measures or different interests, different objectives, different understanding, different sentiments on what drives this war. And hence the priorities are very much aligned that. So I think that I'm afraid that what is happening in Ethiopia today not only will cost it dearly, the country dearly in terms of economical consequences, ramifications, but also it will cost dearly in terms of the political ramifications, in the sense of the integrity of the state itself are at play. And this war will only make it worse. It will not improve it. It will not strengthen the integrity of the state. Rather the opposite. It will weaken the integrity of the state the more the war is fought, so to say. And that's the paradox, as you point at. That is the paradox, as you point at. That the more they drive this war along the lines they are thinking now, the more they are alienating themselves for their explicit objective to restore Ethiopian integrity and statehood.
Yeah, I think you put it succinctly when you said you might be I was going to say you put it beautifully when you said you might be attempting to destroy your enemy, but you are actually destroying yourself. And there was this article written by an Ethiopian economist about the inflation and skyrocketing of prices in Addis Ababa. And I was expecting that the writer would attribute at least part of the problem to the war, because everything has been brought to a halt, and every national institution and resource has been commandeered into the war. That it makes sense that there would be economic catastrophe. It's obvious. It's no brainer to anybody. But he attributed the blame to the U.S. economic sanction, and didn't say anything of the war. And it was extraordinary to me that an economist would fail to see the price that war makes people pay. But I think sooner rather than later, people will wake up to what war means and say, maybe this isn't what we should be doing as a people. But I think we're running out of time. So I'll go to my final question. If I am holding it up for more than I should, I'm sorry in advance, Kjetil. I want to ask you about the letter that you have written to the Nobel Committee, urging them to resign. And I'm wondering what motivated you to write that. Did you really expect that they would read your letter and consider resigning, or was it more symbolic? What was the rationale on your part, at least?
No, it was well, my intentions are genuine, to use that term. That as the Nobel Committee themselves phrase it, that once a prize is given, it cannot be taken back, it cannot be withdrawn. Okay? And the second precondition, they say that we as a committee can never disclose or comment upon anything of our thinking once a prize is given. We cannot comment upon how the laureates are behaving or not behaving, or criticize them or praise them as such. Or they do praise, but they don't criticize. So if those two conditions are there, and if the committee members, who are 5 decent people, social democrats, blue-eyed Norwegians, naive to a certain degree, definitely, but also committed, I believe, to the sake of peace. So my question then was, what can you do to signal to the world at large, and certainly to signal to the suffering Tigrayan people and the Eritrean people and the Ethiopian people, and to signal to the Ethiopian regime and Abiy Ahmed himself that the prize was a mistake to give it to him, it was too early, And what you are doing is totally against the principles of the Nobel Institute and the prize you have been awarded, which is the most recognizable prize in the world. And we are strongly objecting to your policies and behavior. What can they do to signal that? Well, only one thing, and that is to step down collectively. And that was my intention, to say that in public, to encourage the committee members to actually do it. Yes, I never believe they will do, because, you know, it's a very privileged position to be on a Nobel committee. You are really the elite of the elite.
Yeah.
So nobody wants to give that up voluntarily. Not on, you know, at least none of them have shown the principled stand and the personal integrity so far to do it. So, but it was also, from my point of view, as a Norwegian, as a professor of peace and conflict studies, as a human rights professor, all my research has kind of underpinned also the objectives and the framework of the Nobel Prize, so to say, Peace Prize. I personally also wanted to send a signal to Ethiopian friends, to Tigray, that, you know, there are many people in Norway who are critical to the Nobel Committee for the way they are behaving. So that was also part of it. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, I think it was a very powerful letter, and I hope they have found a way to read it, and I hope they would use it to kind of inform their future decisions on this matter. But one thing that we have been debating and discussing about the Nobel Peace Prize Committee is when they decided to give the award to Abiy Ahmed, they didn't have the benefit of hindsight that we now have. They didn't have the body of evidence that he has gone on to produce. So maybe we could see the point. We could understand why they thought it was a good idea to give the award to him. I don't think there is any question about that. But what has been beyond the pale, what has been very hard to understand for most of us, is that the absolute silence in the face of all the things that the laureate is doing in Tigray. And as a Norwegian yourself, who I would assume has some special access to the typical Norwegian psyche, do you understand the silence? Why is it that they have chosen to remain absolutely silent in the face of all the things happening?
Well, as I said, they are hiding behind the so-called traditions of the committee and the limitations of the Nobel Testament, as they say. But that doesn't specify the procedures of communication. And paradoxically, if you remember, in 2019, I believe, or was it last year? I'm a bit uncertain of the date now, when the rumors in Ethiopia spread that the Nobel Committee regretted the prize. And I believe even the late CEO Mesfin commented upon that, which reached which reached the ears of the Nobel Committee. And then, instead of staying quiet and silent as they practice now, they issued a statement, quite unparalleled. They issued a statement saying, one, that we cannot withdraw the prize once it is given, fair enough, but added another paragraph in the statement saying that we are fully behind our decision to grant the prize to Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed, re-endorsing him even in the midst of conflict, before the war, but in the midst of, backsliding reforms and domestic turmoil. So that makes their silence today even more peculiar in my eyes. But why they do it, you have to ask them, but they will not answer you. but you can try.
Yeah. Well, Kjetil, this has been an absolute pleasure for me. It was very nice having you. I hope we will have more conversations in the future. Got a lot of things that I would want to discuss with you. I appreciate this a great deal. Thank you so much.
Thank you, my friend. Take care.
Have a good night. Have a good night. Take care.